When the diver first saw the overturned wreck on the seabed, he didn't expect to find any survivors. The ship had been underwater for nearly 3 days, sitting upside down in total darkness at a depth of almost 30 metres. But as he moved through a flooded doorway, a hand suddenly reached out and grabbed him. The man attached to that hand had been breathing stale, pressurised air in a tiny bubble trapped inside the wreck. His name was Okene, and he had just survived one of the most improbable ordeals in maritime history. This is the true story of the man who lived 3 days underwater. On May 26, 2013, the accommodation tug Jascon 4 was supporting an oil tanker off the coast of Nigeria. On board were 12 crew members, including the ship's cook, Okene. A sudden ocean swell struck the tug, knocking it off balance, and before anyone could react, the ship rolled over. Sleepers were thrown from bunks, lights failed, and water rushed in. With no time to organise, the crew were scattered as compartments flooded and the vessel sank, stern first, towards the seabed. The Jascon 4 sank rapidly. The crew had no opportunity to deploy lifeboats or send a distress signal. As the vessel filled with seawater, the pressure equalised and it descended until it struck the seafloor, coming to rest upside down at a depth of roughly 30 metres. Inside, compartments inverted. Floors became ceilings. Objects and equipment floated freely until they wedged against bulkheads. Entire rooms were flooded within seconds. In the chaos, Okene found himself trapped in a small compartment, disorientated by the darkness and the unnatural orientation of his surroundings. He felt water rising around him and moved instinctively, grasping for anything solid. But seconds later, the water level rose to his chest. But then, something unexpected happened. When an overturned vessel floods, pockets of breathable air can form in enclosed spaces. The rapidly rising water in Okene's compartment compressed the remaining air upward against the ceiling. As the vessel settled on the seabed, the flooding subsided just enough to leave a small dome of trapped air, approximately 2 metres wide and less than a metre above the waterline. Okene pushed himself above the waterline and could finally breathe. In total darkness, time becomes abstract. Okene had no watch, no light, and no way to know how deep the water was. He could only hear the shifting hull, the creaking of metal under pressure, and occasionally distant thuds as debris settled. Okene navigated by touch, feeling for anything that was not submerged. He found 2 mattresses pinned against a wall, which he stacked to gain elevation out of the water. He also found a bottle of Coca-Cola and a small bag of food supplies, but no other substantial resources. In order to survive in such an environment, Okene needed 3 things: breathable air, manageable CO2 levels, and body temperature preservation. Of these, the CO2 level is the most invisible and deadly. In a sealed air pocket, oxygen slowly decreases as it is consumed, and carbon dioxide rises much faster. Symptoms of high levels of CO2 include headaches, dizziness, confusion, and rapid breathing. Another looming threat was hypothermia. Even in water above 20 degrees Celsius, an inactive adult can lose core temperature steadily. However, Okene kept his torso out of the water, significantly improving his odds. Over the next several hours, Okene called out periodically, but he heard no responses. What he did hear was faint scraping and tapping noises under the waterline. He did not know at the time what they were, but dive teams later confirmed that marine scavengers often arrive quickly after maritime accidents. Okene was, in his own words, not alone. but not in a comforting sense. Meanwhile, topside, the world was unaware that anyone had survived. The tugboat had sunk suddenly and without communication. Oil company authorities assumed all hands were lost. Nigerian media began reporting the incident, but no rescue effort was underway because there was no indication anyone was alive to rescue. By the second day, physiological symptoms had increased. Okene felt headaches and fatigue, likely from CO2 buildup. He also described feeling a change in the air pocket, condensation gathering on surfaces, droplets forming overhead, and the smell of oil becoming stronger. Okene had also begun vomiting due to motion sickness, losing additional fluids and vital electrolytes. On the third day, a body recovery team finally mobilised. The task was not classified as a rescue, as no survivors were expected. At depths around 30 metres, saturation divers or professional salvage divers are required due to the risks of nitrogen narcosis and decompression injuries. The dive team descended, tethered to a surface vessel, equipped with helmet cameras and communication lines. The goal was simple: document the wreck, recover bodies, and assess structural conditions for salvage. As the divers entered the overturned hull, visibility was limited. Silt and debris clouded the water. They moved, compartment by compartment, often entering spaces purely by feel. As one diver moved through a partially flooded compartment, his camera recorded something he could never have anticipated. A hand, reaching out of the darkness. The diver recoiled and shouted over comms.
What's that? Okay. Alright, you found one, yeah? He's alive, he's alive. Okay, keep him there.
At the surface, the dive coordinator initially assumed he meant a recently deceased body exhibiting buoyancy. However, when the diver repeated himself, confirming movement and responsiveness, the team's focus shifted instantly from recovery to rescue. However, the rescue was not simple. At that depth, after 60 hours, Okene's body had absorbed significant inert gas due to pressure. Bringing him to the surface too quickly could cause decompression sickness, which can be fatal. The dive team had to slowly guide him through the water and escort him through a series of pressure adjustments. Once on the surface, Okene was transferred to a decompression chamber for 48 hours to allow his body to readjust safely. During that time, he learned that he was the sole survivor of the wreckage. Experts in maritime survival described Okene's case as a physiological outlier. Survival for 3 days underwater without specialised equipment is considered almost impossible due to CO2 accumulation, oxygen depletion, hypothermia, pressure effects, and dehydration. However, Okene had benefited from a combination of unusual factors: a stable air pocket, a way to elevate his torso above water, and finally, access to small amounts of liquid. After his recovery, helmet camera footage from the diver's discovery circulated globally, drawing widespread attention. Viewers were stunned, not only by Okene's survival, but by the diver's reaction. A professional, trying to recover bodies, encountering a living person deep inside a shipwreck. Today, Okene lives a quieter life, away from the oil industry. He's spoken publicly only on rare occasions, usually to emphasise how close he came to dying, and how survival in his case was not the result of strength or preparation, but circumstance. In maritime safety circles, Okene's survival is cited as one of the most improbable on record. Not because it was miraculous in the supernatural sense, but because everything that needed to go right did. A pocket of air formed. The ship came to rest at just the right angle. The temperature was barely survivable. A dive team happened to be dispatched. A trained diver happened to find the one compartment with breathable air. And that diver happened to make physical contact before Okene lost consciousness. In the end, survival was not a matter of skill, training, or preparation. It was endurance against time, pressure, and physiology. And a reminder that sometimes the ocean takes everything, and sometimes, without explanation, it leaves someone behind.